Hello and welcome to SHRM Session 4. In this session, we will cover culture, its components, and several models which you would also find very important for your assignment. Your learning outcome for this lesson revolves around defining culture and appreciating the literature around it. By the end of the session, you will be able to gain different perspectives about culture and how they contribute to the literature on the subject. Firstly, it is important to remember that out of everything you will learn in your MBA, culture is notoriously difficult to define. To give some perspective to just how difficult it is, in 1952, the American anthropologists Kroeber and Clarkon critically reviewed concepts and definitions of culture and compiled a list of 164 different definitions. Apte, writing in the 10-volume Encyclopedia of Language and Linguistics, summarized the problem as follows. Despite a century of efforts to define culture adequately, there was in the early 1990s no agreement among anthropologists regarding its nature. Christina de Rossi, an anthropologist at Barnet and Southgate College in London, said in an interview that this makes it so difficult to define culture in one way. Culture appears to have become key in our interconnected world, she said, which is made up of so many ethnically diverse societies, but also riddled by conflicts associated with religion, ethnicity, ethical beliefs, and essentially the elements which make up culture. But culture is no longer fixed. It never was. It is essentially fluid and constantly in motion. In this, we see how changeable culture is, how fluid it is, and how it is constantly changing according to societal elements. According to Becker, culture is a shared understanding developed in situations where all orientation relates to how others orient to the same situation. Shine defined culture as a pattern of basic assumptions invented, discovered, or developed by a given group as it learns to cope with its problems of external adaptation and internal integration. That has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to new members as a correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. This definition shows us how culture develops individuals and influences them in a social setting. Hofstede, whose work we will further look into in part 3 of this session, defined culture as the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one group or category from people of another. This definition reminds us that people are culturally different according to their nationalism, religion, race, or even family setup. A slightly negative definition of culture is provided by Spencer Oti. He says that culture is a fuzzy set of basic assumptions and values, orientations to life, beliefs, policies, procedures, and behavioral conventions that are shared by a group of people and that influence but do not determine each member's behavior and his or her interpretations of the meaning of other people's behavior. Unlike in Shine's definition, this author says that although culture influences individuals, it does not determine their behavior. Some authors have provided doubtful views on the validity of culture. A scholar named Parsons never included culture into his conception of a social system. He always kept culture distinct from the social system. He always entertained a refuge for culture, which is just one of four aspects of the action system, being the cultural, social, organic, and personal, with three of these aspects not to be reduced to the social. Parsons said that culture is that part of the operation which settles down as symbols. And interestingly, he also wanted to distance culture from the social element, further saying that art, religion, and science are part of culture and not the society. Similarly, Luhmann, again not someone who is too big a fan of culture, also treats culture differently from other notions. Yet he seems to have different reasons for doing so. He, for instance, calls culture one of the worst notions ever invented, having devastating effects for religion as well as for art. He takes great care to describe it as a historic notion invented in the 18th century when culture lost the genitive which it had in ancient times. Culture with the Greeks and the Romans had been an expression of care, of attention, and of worship. And according to Luhmann, culture has now become an independent sphere of decisively intellectual comparisons of human behavior in different times and regions.